Hey guys, it's Jose Galison. A big shout out to the homie at Jolly on Klebold for that intro. It's pretty dope. I feel like most people out there you either love that or you hate it probably, but I think it was fucking dope. Today we're continuing our series with Jacob on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. I don't have any ads for you guys today. If there are any advertisers out there that hey, hit me up. But I think Nadeau's taking a month off. I think to restructure some things. So hopefully we'll see them back here soon. I do enjoy their brand, but won't be doing that no more. But with that, let's go ahead and get into it. You've got Jacob here. What's up, my man? How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. All right. I mean, we live in a world controlled by satanic pedophiles.
Yep.
I don't know I don't know how to feel. So
Yeah, I feel like it's funny. I play these different intros, and there's so many different connections. And it is. I could totally. I feel like I could probably weave any one of those into false memory syndrome. It really does tie into a lot because this is something that comes up typically when it's like sexual ritual abuse or something along like
yeah,
which there were a lot of elements of that and so much stuff. I believe the false memory. Maybe obviously at some point maybe we'll get into this. I don't remember the circumstances. I believe they even got involved in the Oklahoma City bombing at some point. They poked their heads
yep,
in. So, I mean, I don't know if that was in relation to like John Doe 2 or something, although none of those guys, even the John Doe witnesses, made the stand anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, but point being is they have their hands in all the pots. And I think this episode, we already covered a lot in the first episode. And this one, I think where we left off is we were kind of getting to the SLA. I know we just mentioned SRA. I'm throwing all these acronyms at you guys. SRA's sexual or satanic ritual abuse. And SLA is the Symbionese Liberation Army, and we'll kind of get into that. And I know this. We were talking about this before we started. I just do want to give a warning. This may end up being a lot of parts of series, and there might be a lot of times where we're meandering off the path, where it seems like we're not really even talking about False Memory Syndrome Foundation. But that's kind of the nature of talking about False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Is the whole idea of here's this board of people. I mean, like obviously, how was this created? What were the circumstances? And then looking at all these individual people, and then looking at all the things they're connected to. And this will be vast, but I feel like at the end of this, you will come away from this not trusting anything that they put their hands in at all, because there's so many connections. And yes, obviously each one of these individual connections, we could get into the weeds and the sources or this or that, and maybe have valid disputes one way or the other. But you get to a point where there's just such a vast amount of connections, and so many, and many of them being just undeniable, that you get to the point where the pattern recognition kicks in, and it just kind of does its job. And so that's what we're doing here. We're brute forcing you with all the crazy stuff. So just a forewarning throughout the series, or maybe a lot of meandering. You're like, what the fuck does this have to do with False Memory Syndrome Foundation? Which, you know what, that's the nature of how these always work, especially like Jolly West, how this works with lots of conspiracies. All of a sudden, Jolly West just pops in, and you're like, well, what the fuck? So that's kind of the same deal with this. So I know it sounds like a reach. We were like, Symbionese Liberation Army. And how the
yep.
fuck, we'll get there. It may take a minute, but we'll get there. So I guess I'll just pass it off to you. We'll get into it. Just, I guess, kind of let the people know what the Symbionese Liberation Army is. I believe, from my recollection, at least the American one, I believe they allude to there being a network, although I don't know I mean, a little bit of a spoiler alert for people out there. This shit glows like the sun. So when I say, like, I don't know to what degree there really was, like, a network, that could just be, like, making it look grander than it is. But at least the American side of it, from my understanding, was just a handful of dudes and Donald DeFreeze, and which was kind of like a black very much into the kind of the Black Power type movement sort of stuff. But then weirdly, a bunch of random white dudes in their like 30s to 50s and chicks that were also with them. So it was a weird group. I feel like now anybody that digs into parapolitics, if you just kind of took a breathe, look at these people, you'd be like, this is already weird. But I'll pass it off to you. You kind of let the audience know what your impression of what the SLA is, and then we'll kind of get into it.
So I'll touch on a couple of things that you um, had mentioned right at the beginning. Um, I kind of struggled with how to tell this story um, because you could just say the blatant part out loud, but to truly understand the depth of this like genuine conspiracy, you really need to know who these people are, why they're connected, um, and I mean there's so much more in actuality that we probably won't cover, which is totally fine. Um, but you really do need to know a lot of your just basic U.S. history, human psychology, all of these different things. Now, the reason why I decided to start telling this, for one, I believe that MK Ultra controls everything around us. Um, you know, Wu Tang said that it was cash. No, it's MK Ultra. Ever since it was ended, it seems that you can't find a part of culture that is not affected by it. For anyone who thinks that it ended, I mean, MK Ultra ended. They just changed the name. They subcontracted it. Now, the reason I decided to talk about false memory syndrome, uh, just like MK Ultra, it affects everything. I was interested through the Satanic Panic. I always thought the Satanic Panic was weird, but it makes sense that a civilization could develop a moral panic. So it's like this perfect lie, which makes it very insidious.
They sold it to us as if it was the Salem witch trials part two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah.
And I mean, they kind of fluffed up through their Mockingbird media, um, you know, like isolated events, which they may or may not have had a hand in, um, to even sell that further. Plus, I mean, think about it. This is the first time we have like Jerry Springer, we have Oprah, um, daytime talk shows played such a massive role in the Satanic Panic. It was incredible.
Oh, I can
Um,
only imagine. I didn't even think of that element and how sensational it would make things. So, and
yeah,
most of that stuff is staged bullshit anyway. So it's kind of it was like
right.
the era of the WWE kayfabe in many realms other than not just WWE. So that was like a,
Hmm.
and it was like this known thing too, where we knew a lot of us knew it was fake. So I mean, yeah, it makes sense that this
Yeah,
would be kind of what people point to when they would point to like Satanic Panic. When I say most of the audience probably knew it was fake, so you know.
yeah.
But all right,
And
anyways.
and what's interesting, like I've never not known a life without the Satanic Panic because I've always heard a story. Um, the the weekend that my parents decided to get married was the same weekend that Judas Priest was getting sued in Reno for their role in the Satanic Panic. So, I mean, pretty much my entire life, I've known nothing but this. Um, and it's like the 10 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever. Like, I guarantee you, even in your own personal life, it wouldn't take much to find a connection of somebody being affected. So that's why I viewed it as so important to talk about. So as we go around in these circles, just realize it does have a point. Um, so real quick, before the SLA, this is incredibly important context for this. So false memory syndrome, what is it? It is actually um, it is basically a way for abusers to be able to hide their abuse, basically. That's what it seems like to me. Of course, maybe a clinical psychologist might have a different opinion. I've even listened to Jordan Peterson talk about it. Um, so, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation played a critical role in acting as a clearinghouse of scientific information and as a catalyst for discussion of specific claims regarding memory. Uh, false memory syndrome, not in the DSM. It is not an actual clinical diagnosis, not recognized in medicine or psychiatry. Um, it is considered to be, by the people that are proponents of it, a psychological condition in which person a person remembers events that have not actually occurred. A situation in which examination, therapy, or hypnosis has accelerated apparent memories or completely made up memories, especially of childhood abuse that is disputed by family members and are often traumatic to the patient. Let's see, psychological condition, not really. Um, and or situation, adults, children recover memories. So one thing to point out, this is not like faulty memories. The way that the brain works, we do have a faulty memory. However, a entirely false made up memory, that's just a lie. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we are expected to believe that there are just like this massive problem. There's not a child abuse problem, but what there is a problem with psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors out there implanting false memories of these very specific crimes. What seems more likely? Um, my personal opinion, this is really all just a roundabout way to be able to cover up the first generation of mind control patients because they would have been about 30 or 40. Brainwashing and mind control, especially trauma based mind control, starts breaking down about 30 to 40 years old. That's in the 80s to 90s, would have been when this first generation of kids would have had it. Now, there are certain instances where it came out into the public. Now, the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, the Federated Forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army. What a mouthful. That's what she said. Commonly referred to as simply as SLA, was a small American far left militant organization active between 1973 and 75. The FBI and wider American law enforcement considered the SLA to be the first terrorist organization to rise from the American left. I disagree with that, but whatever. During its existence from 1973 to 1975, the group killed at least 2 people. It was a lot more, but that's what they can confirm. Committed armed bank robberies, attempted bombings, and successfully committed them, and other violent crimes, including the kidnapping of newspaper heiress Patty Hearst. A 2016 book by Brad Schreiber claimed that the federal government and the California Department of Corrections were involved in creating the SLA, a quote, phony left wing group the government used to discredit radicals in the 1970s. Schreiber said then Governor Ronald Reagan's administration directed a CIA official to create the Black Cultural Association at the medical facility in Vacaville, California, as part of developing the SLA. So, from the very beginning, the roots it has, it just glows, like you said. Like,
Yeah, I mean, to once again jump ahead, because I don't know if we'll get into this, but I believe this was kind of part of the tentacles of Operation Chaos, and we'll get into
yes,
that. So that's my understanding. But yeah, I did find it funny in your thread. You have a quote, and once we dig into this and flesh this out more, you guys will see this. I think the she Mae Brussel called this a rabid guerrilla band consisted predominantly of CIA agents and police informers, which yeah, I mean, this really did, like, when I'm looking through this, it just felt like a fucking, for those who pay attention to my channel, I just recently interviewed David Gleddy, who was an operative, and it just felt like a CIA version of that, but, like, if it was, like, some lefty, kind of black power type guy, that was in that like type of vein at that time. That's
Yeah.
what it felt like. So I mean, obviously he likes to distinguish himself as an operative as opposed to an informant, and we'll get into the freeze, and he was more of an informant, and it seems a lot of these people probably were as
Personal
well.
preference.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the difference being, Gleddy like to make is the difference between doing it just for the love of the game or being caught in crime. So it seems these elements were more caught in crime, but this you'll also see too for those who have read Chaos. This will have a lot of parallels between Manson, like big time, what was going on with him. So, but go on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole different other, rabbit hole too. I mean, that's that's like, hey, let's give this petty criminal that's had a bunch of a bunch of Scientology processing, and give him a bunch of LSD, teach him how to brainwash people, and let him loose. Like it's crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
but it is cool. It is interesting because there is parallels because I believe
oh
we're
yeah,
roughly around the same time, and it is
yep,
like kind of the same methodology. So it is cool kind of
yeah.
seeing almost two cases and infiltrating slightly different spheres because it seems like the sphere that Manson was injected into was obviously much different than the sphere that someone like the Freeze that we'll get
Well,
into. We haven't really
here
fleshed them out yet, but we'll kind of got into. So
here's the thing, like, this is still kind of hard for me to like wrap my head around, is exactly how compartmentalized the CIA or just like intelligence is in general. It's strictly on a need to know basis.
yeah,
So you could literally be deep in the shit. You could be like deep behind, doing undercover work, and literally to the point where you are just as bad as these people, and there could be like this whole other operation going on literally right around you and you would not even know it.
yeah, a good
So,
example of this would be like the John Doe 2 hunt, and then just kind of
mhm,
the Oklahoma City, in general, the individuals they question. I was reading Hoffman's book on this today. He made this point in the compartmentalization of how the FBI works. So when you had the greatest manhunt going on, you had all sorts of people that were, getting warrantless searches, and they were talking to Tom, Dick, and Harry, and every little guy. And getting
yeah,
information. But then on the flip side, certain individuals who were like prime suspects, like Strassmeyer, Brescia, I believe Mahon and Millar, kind of didn't really get that sort of attention that some of these nobodies did. And that, I believe, is an effect of the compartmentalization because you
yep,
have a lot of people chasing down every lead, but then they have whoever is in charge of this division. Oh well, we'll just put a little bit more of a helping hand, or put certain individuals on this person or whatever. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I mean, I'm ascribing a lot of motive here that I don't know for sure. But either way, it's kind of like the compartmentalization lends itself to this happening, to where they aren't really coordinating information amongst each other. At least the cells that they don't feel need to be coordinating with each other
yep.
aren't coordinating with each other. So, that's kind of intentional, I think.
I think it's intentional, but I also think that like they get so cocky that, like, it would be hard not to just like have this like big massive dose of like egoism all the time. But like that's partially why uh 9/11 was able to happen at least the way that it did. Um,
Yeah,
like there
to
was
be
just,
to be quick. Or sorry, I mean maybe you're getting to it.
no,
There's
you're
also
good.
the you can sell it off as being like the bureaucratic nature of the state as well.
Yeah,
9/11 is a good example of that. Where, I mean, okay, don't get me wrong. That's pushing the limits of what you could say is that, but you kind of it's plausible somewhat. A lot of the
it
things, at least from
totally
my
is though.
understanding. Yeah, because a lot of it was stuff like, oh, they dropped the ball. Oh, the CIA was watching this guy, but oh, somehow he still ended up getting a passport and be in the States and doing this and that. You're like, but you can pass it off as the compartmentalization. This guy, so, I mean, the same thing
Mhm.
with the October 7th stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff's come out with that they knew all this information, but you could probably, semi plausibly sell it off as like, oh, well, this guy didn't coordinate with that guy, or oh, that just didn't, that kind of got shuffled to this pile, or whatever, because there is a bit of both where you can, if you really want to be the, I don't know, I guess the lame libertarian, you could just sell it off as all is just that. But either way, in the end, the effect is the same, and it's kind of like, well, we're getting fucked either way. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I think it's just Occam's razor that applies here.
mm,
It's like the most simple
yeah,
explanation is usually the correct one. And just like with everything else, like whether you're in the the agency, the CIA, the FBI, like whatever agency, NSA, it's kind of like football teams. Like you're imagine the FBI coming up to you and being like, "This is our investigation now," and you work for the CIA, you'd be like, "Get the fuck out of here!"
yeah.
like,
I do
you
want to
know?
say real quick. I just had a thought, and I thought it was kind of prescient. I do think there is truth to that bureaucratic nature and how this stuff is. But I think
Yes.
there are certain individuals that get into these bureaucratic monsters, and they know how to operate the levers of these behemoths and move it in certain ways, and that essentially creates incentives that allow certain actors within these fields to do things like this. So the compartmentalization does to some extent exist by intent, and also to some extent just by
Yep.
the nature of the beast. But there are individuals who recognize that and use that. Like, I mean, I've talked many times about how, like, I was active duty for like over a decade, and like I remember seeing, like, especially once you get to that like mid-level management, you start to see that there are people who know how to play these games. They know how the bureaucratic nature of these things work. I mean,
Mhm.
usually the guy at the lower levels, the grease monkeys just turning, changing tires on the flight line or whatever. Or in the case of the FBI, the guy that fucking is, just chasing down little, minor leads. They're kind of in the same. They're the guys that might still have some belief in the system and still, at some point they come to realization and maybe start working up that ladder. But either way, it's just kind of the nature of that. Like, that's how that works. So I think there are people that get into these organizations, and the more power these organizations have, the more these people are able to manipulate it. So, because there are games you can play when you're in bureaucratic things. They are usually pretty much lay out like, this is how this works. Complain to this guy at this department and this thing will happen. I mean, it's not too hard to play the game at those things. It's just kind of soul crushing. So,
Well, and I mean, that's so for anyone that doesn't know, and this is relevant to all of this, but Alan Dulles was the one that really like spearheaded with Sidney Gottlieb, MK Ultra, which leads to all of this. Um, After Dulles got fired by JFK, um, let's see, John A. McComb comes in just for a couple of years. He had no idea MK Ultra was happening at all. And I mean, he's the director of the CIA. If anyone's supposed to know, it's supposed to be him. And they hid it from him from, let's see, 1961 to 1965. So, I mean, when everyone's saying like, oh well, they're not that well of an oiled machine, they can't keep secrets. It's like, well, the
yes
Manhattan
and no.
Project was a
It's like
thing.
yes and no. There's a
Yeah.
well-oiled machine of
Yep.
parasites within that machine.
Yep.
So, yeah. So.
Yep. And that's so the SLA, I think, is part like ego test and part like experiment that went out of control, which is what I think a lot of these things actually are. Which is why they came up with things like the false memory syndrome. Like how convenient. No, no, no. That's a fake memory. Like even just saying it out loud sounds crazy. Um, and so let's see. Let's get into the SLA because we'll leave the SLA and we'll come back to it just because
Mhm.
everything comes in circles. Let's see here. So there's a bunch of connections to the SLA and Vietnam. There was, let's see here. So, I'm looking through my own thread and I should have had this ready. Um, so there was an essay that was written. It's called The Penal Colony. I did provide a link to it on Archive. Um, it's definitely worth a read. Um, the author of The Penal Colony, a Berkeley psychologist, had emphasized rather than terminating MK Ultra, the CIA shifted its programs from public institutions to private cult groups, including the People's Temple. The CIA used the land and surrounding land that Jonestown was on to be able to train uh, some of the first like special forces. Um, super crazy, intense stuff. Connected to Operation Gladio and uh, Operation Phoenix. Um, let's see here. So the connection. Yeah, Mae Brussels. Before I forget about that, because I just saw her name. Anyone listening to this, make sure and just tag her name. She is, even though she has sadly passed away, uh, her legacy has been a wealth of knowledge left behind. And, you know, people like me and Jose and people like Austin and stuff, we can only do things that we can do because of people like this. Let's see. So the
And there's
SLA.
a real quick on that. I believe there's like I forget the name of it. There's like a Mae Brussel like archive or something along
Yep.
those lines. Someone's putting together a project where they've got together all her old stuff because she was from a time to where it was like it wasn't really kind of archived like that. Not
Yeah,
just I'm
no,
not saying she was like
go
small
out
time or anything, but yeah,
you go out and get a physical document,
yep.
you know,
Yeah,
and
so it is good we
yeah,
have people that do stuff like that that archive important document things like much like Richard Booth
yep,
does with all the OKC stuff because yeah this stuff is you kind of build off of other people's knowledge and like nothing I really ever say is really truly original. I might have some insights and connecting dots, but at the end of the day I'm finding information from other people and stringing it together. So
yeah. I mean, same thing. But the reason why that's still important is because sometimes people need to hear the same information just put a different way, and that's why people that can do that are still important. Um, so the SLA, Brussels said, was an extension of psychological experimentation projects connected to Stanford Research Institute, uh, SRI, in Menlo Park. There's a link to that in my thread. So what's interesting about this is the Stanford Research Institute is also another one of these front groups, much like the Human Ecology Fund. They were entirely set up as a shell corporation as a way to as a way for the CIA to show the public, see, look, we're not doing anything bad because the CIA wasn't connected with them. Not until the 70s did we find that out. And then by then, the damage is already done. And they moved on to other things like Air America. um, so these, the SLA stems from what they learned experimenting on prisoners and experimenting on the mentally disabled, uh, experimenting on children, even just like counseling patients that had an issue with depression. Um, the the doctor, let's see, so much information flying. It's all important, I promise. Um, so there's two names that are going to be very important to remember: Martin T. Orne, ORNE, and then the second name is going to be Dr. Ewan Cameron. So Ewan Cameron, he was basically like your stereotypical mad scientist. Like that was him. And he was being funded through the Human Ecology Fund in Canada to be able to just do like the most heinous, gruesome brainwashing
Yeah, he was the one. I believe maybe we talked about this last episode. I believe he's the
Yep.
one with the quote of saying that he can make some like, meld a mind to where they believe that they're their parent essentially.
Yep.
So, which is kind of fucking wild. I mean, he claimed to be able to
Yeah.
do that. I don't know if there's truth to it or not, but yeah. So, but go
Yeah.
ahead.
So the SLA spawned from things like this. Um, Also, as of recently, as you know, because it's like 50, 60 years later, um, we have gained access to Army records, which has completely exposed Pennsylvania University, which hosted a bunch of secret experiments. They were one out of many prisons. It, it's a safe bet to say that there were more prisons experimenting on humans than not, because it's free test subjects and they can't really say no. But they're also going to offer them like, hey, we'll give you some, you know, we'll take some time off your sentence, or we'll pay you or whatever. But it was just horrific human experiment, like Nazi level stuff, to where it's like, let's just inject them with toxins and see what happens, kind of thing. And well, I mean, it was Nazi scientists coming over directing American scientists doing this after World War II, which was paperclip. Um, so the people that were affected by this were people like let's see, Colston Westbrook. Westbrook was a veteran of the CIA's murderous Phoenix program, which there we go. There's a connection to Michael Aquino,
Yep.
which definitely gets touched on later because I mean, how could you not talk about crazy eyebrow guy?
Yes. Exactly. And then he that branches off into Satanism and cults, and
Yep,
off to the races we go.
exactly. Every time, all roads lead back to Satan.
Yeah,
It's
which real quick
hilarious.
for the audience, I mean, if you've been paying attention to my show, we've talked about Phoenix plenty of times. That
Yep,
was just essentially that was Gladio in fucking what in Vietnam,
yep,
basically is what it was. Which I do find it odd that they do. There is a commonality with these type of programs and having birds. I know the
hmm,
condor was basically the similar version of it in South America. So yeah, that's a. But yes, that's what they did. They basically over in Vietnam, they did all sorts of false flags and assassinations, whatever, and made it essentially look like the Viet Cong would start doing it, and to sow distrust in the populace. And that's not
yep.
that's not advocating for the Viet Cong.
Nope,
So
nope,
yeah,
nope,
but
nope.
yeah, I mean, there was bad guys versus bad guys. Yeah,
Yeah, and it was like bad guys versus bad guys trying to see how bad we could make things. Like
yeah,
it's it's like cartoonishly evil when you think about it, which is partially why I think it's hard for people to wrap their heads around any of this.
yeah,
Um, just like I said that uh, Ewan Cameron is just like the stereotypical, like you go to a cheesy haunted house and they have a mad scientist room. That's him. And so it's like, that can't be real, obviously, right? Like, it's just, it's crazy. It is crazy to most people.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, back in the '70s, you said to get some prisoners and homeless people, and
yep.
you're there. You go.
Yep,
So,
and a bunch of retards and little kids that can't say no, obviously, and
mhm.
then, like, it's crazy, literally
Maybe
just
trick some minorities, maybe
mhm.
like,
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
but that's
exactly,
that was the
just
way they did it.
literally preying on the weakest people that can't say no in society, so,
Which
really, nothing has changed.
which I find it funny. I believe I recall this from reading Aberration: The Heartland of Real. A lot of these, especially particularly Jolly West, did take a liking to, injecting themselves into like social discussions, and they
Mhm.
would very often, kind of fall in the general kind of, how do I put this, the traditional lefty bullshit,
Yep,
progressive worldview type stuff. But meanwhile, they're fucking doing these awful things to like the most vulnerable people. Like if you're looking at it through this worldview, supposedly the progressive worldview, you are literally your own villain if you're
Yeah.
if you're expressing these beliefs. So I mean, obviously, I think they know this, but or they just are that but died in the wool that they think, oh, this is helping towards the world order or whatever.
Yep.
But I mean, never know. It depends on the person, really. But yeah, I find that interesting, and then especially with this case of the SLA where. This one, it was like, obviously I said there was parallels between Manson. Manson was much more in the cult-ish sort of realm, although not maybe not necessarily explicitly. Whereas this was more like they were injecting themselves into the almost the, I guess you could say it's a religion, the Marxist worldview, the race essentialist worldview, or what, like a lot of those types of worldviews that were going on at that time, that realm right there, like the commie type bullshit, essentially. Like they were in that realm of thinking. And to
Yep.
the credit, I know there might be a lot of parapolitics heads, maybe some of the commies that tend to be in that realm might listen to my show. They actually at the same time though were also, it seems to be, they were actually breaking down, I mean, that maybe elements that me and you may say are more positive, or maybe were, at least against the goals of the elite at the time, because they were essentially causing problems with like the Black Panthers, and we may get into that. So that seems to be part of their role, was to kind of infiltrate and destroy to some extent that movement. And in some ways, they were embodying the worst parts of it. So
Yep.
I don't know. I find that interesting. That they do that. These doctors pretend to, I don't know. I guess the juxtaposition of those two things there. So, because yeah, this very much was causing problems with, like, I don't know, like the X's of the world, like their kind of sphere. It was kind of, breaking them down. Which I don't know about you, but I actually think between MLK and X was a much more positive figure.
Oh yeah.
So, if anything, I think, MLK was actually kind of maybe even a negative figure in some ways. There's a reason why history took a shining to his take on civil rights, as opposed to somebody like X, which is more about independence and,
Yeah.
kind of like, all right, well, let's just go do it type thing. So as opposed to begging for the state. So
Well, yeah,
I don't
and
know.
what's interesting is kind of like his character arc, because he like totally fell into like the brainwashing and the whole like white devil thing, and then he came out of it like right before the end. He was like, whoa, wait a second, and it doesn't surprise me that that happened because he was such an intelligent man. Um, but also, and anybody who, whether they break their programming or not, even if they just go off script once or twice, anyone that makes people or gets people riled up, gets them off the couch, gets them to actually do something, like they've always got to get taken care of, because otherwise they can't continue doing this. I mean, that's why, like, as much as I agree with the position that government schooling should not exist, I mean, the whole reason it does exist, at least in this aspect, is literally for the federal government to have access to the nation's children, to be able to find out who's going to excel in these national programs. So, when we were kids, it was like the GATE program. Um, Now it's STEM and STEAM. Those are literally NSA backed uh, programs. So when you get your kids into these programs and they're like, "Oh, my kid's so smart, my kid's so smart," which that's awesome, proud of you. But you're literally, feeding your sheep to the wolves by doing that. Um,
Hmm.
like it's crazy. I don't know if anyone remembers the hearing tests in elementary or
Hmm.
junior high school. That's actually linked to all of this stuff. Um, ESP testing, isolated from everyone else. Like, I experienced it second, third, fourth, and then it ended in fifth. So obviously I didn't make the cut, or
Yeah,
I
for
did and they
sure.
didn't need me.
Yeah.
So,
You haven't been
like,
activated yet.
yeah, exactly. Um, so I don't know. It's just really interesting. Like, the schooling system's never going to go away because of things like
Yeah.
this. And it's like, it's the National Defense Education Act, which was passed in 1958, which is how they use justification for this. It's always national security. Um,
Mm.
oh no, the Russians are brainwashing, so we need to do that and then do it better. So how do
Yeah.
we do that? We just torture people until we figure it out. Like,
All right. Well,
it's
let's get back
crazy.
on track. I think I don't know where we were at, Westbrook, or I think that where you were
Yep,
at in there.
Westbrook.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so this is where it does kind of all come back. So Westbrook was a veteran of the CIA's Phoenix program. Um, let's see. Oh, come on. Mouse stopped working. There it is. Okay. So when he trained, he hand picked and hand trained the people that would come after him. Um, he would basically train the death squads in South Vietnam. And then after his service, he came back and actually kind of found that it was hard to adapt to civilian life. And so, what ended up happening after Vietnam, this happened after World War II also. It pretty much happens after every uh, instance that we send people overseas, but these people will come back and they're so like institutionalized to war that the only thing that they can do from here on out is doing the same job but just in a different capacity. So, private defense contractors, that sort of thing, which is kind of the direction that Westbrook took. Um, so let's see here. Pacific Architects and Engineers, a CIA proprietary in Southern California. So three of Westbrook's foot soldiers, Emily and William Harris and Angela Atwood, had been students of the College of Foreign Affairs. Don't send your kids to college. A CIA cover at the University of Indiana. University of Indiana. Jesus. So they run into this man who was definitely damaged by war, and he's pretty much been given the green light to just train, guerrilla warfare tacticians in the United States.
Can we real quick? I do want to back up because once again, I said this is part of Operation Chaos, which the big point of that was CIA essentially getting the green light for domestic operations at that point
Yes.
in time, and I do find it interesting. God, I totally had a fucking point and I totally forgot it. It'll come to me in a minute. All right, sorry, I fucked up your spiel.
Nope, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
So basically,
No, no, I remember my point. Then the people and the person, one of the individuals that are clearly in some sort of middle manager role of some sort that you chose was a prior, Phoenix guy. Like it
mhm,
literally, training death squad. So it's kind of like, and then obviously once again to bring up the parallels with Manson. So it's kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? So
yeah.
it's just, I don't know. It just obviously, I guess it could just be like, oh shit, we have this guy, and he kind of somewhat is similar stuff, and he probably work good here, but it's just weird. I'm just saying. I don't
No,
know. I mean,
it's
that's just weird.
so it's
So,
completely valid. This is what I like to do personally. Anybody that wants to do this as well, please go for it. But I always like to, look behind me out of the rabbit hole to just look at the official narrative and just think about the official narrative for a second. Okay, so MK Ultra went from 53 to 73 or 74, and they spent millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, had like top scientists from all around the world working on this, couldn't figure it out. But the petty theft, who's uneducated, Charles Manson figured it out by himself. Jim Jones figured it out by himself. Yeah, bullshit. There's just none of it makes sense. And when you look at people like Westbrook, it's like, well, I think it seemed like if you look into his life, and there's many more like him, by the way, um, he was pretty much just given the green light because he was struggling to basically come back and go back to normal civilian life, which so many people do. Um, there's actually a podcast I recommend to anybody. It's called SOGcast. It's a bunch of Vietnam vets that talk about Vietnam. It gets heavy. Um, all of that relates to this because a lot of these guys are Phoenix guys, um, and then they came back, and yeah, it's intense. So these are the type of people that we're talking about. I don't know if anyone's had the pleasure of meeting a Vietnam vet, but they're all pretty much in just a couple of categories, but they're all intense as shit. Um, and that just carries on. And then you got to look at the 60s as well, which I've been diving a lot into, just like what it was like politically, socially. I mean, people were hitchhiking en masse, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wouldn't do that these days. Fuck
They were still
that.
doing that shit in the 90s. My fucking
Yeah,
older stepbrother would sometimes just hitchhike to school or hitchhike to wherever he wanted to go in town or
it's
wherever the fuck.
crazy.
Just, yeah, there's just, but we lived in a small town. So, but still,
Yeah,
even to the 90s, no one's doing that now. I don't care where you're at. So, but yeah,
yeah.
go on. But
Yeah, so it's interesting to look at where things were culturally. I mean, go listen to the music, go watch the TV broadcast, go read the newspapers if you can get a copy of them. You know, go to your local library and go look at the microfiche. Um, like things were just so interesting, but they were able to get away with doing these things. And then because the CIA, FBI, NSA, all of these organizations are so compartmentalized, and they pretty much, like, if you prove yourself, they give you a blank check and say go off and go do whatever and then report back. And so that's kind of what looked like it happened here. They said, well, this is your set of skills. We've got something going on down here. Let's take you here. And then he got reassigned here. Then he runs into these college students who, college students are the dumbest adults, the absolute dumbest adults ever. Um, like they're still young, so they've got that young brain, but they I mean they're adults, but they don't, like, they're not adults yet. It's
and they think
crazy.
they're special for where they're
Yeah,
at.
yeah, and we're all supposed to bow down to them. Um, so it doesn't surprise me. It seems kind of like low hanging fruit, honestly. Like if you're going to start a cult, yeah, go start it on a college campus.
Yeah.
Don't start a cult. Anyone listening? um, After the SLA's gun-toting crime spree, Patricia Hearst, in preparation for trial, had three psychiatrists in to appraise her state of mind.
Yeah.
Now, there were a
Which
couple of names.
Yeah, I do
Go
think
for
we
it.
should probably back up a little bit and maybe focus on Patricia Hearst because we didn't really give her due. So people can at least maybe even just a summary of her story. You might be able to do it better than me, but I'm of the understanding from my recollection is she was essentially kidnapped by them. I believe there might have been later information. I don't know the veracity of it that she may have even have known them before then, but either way, the story is that she was abducted by them, and it seems pretty legit to me that, and then was, essentially seems like, for lack of a better word, MK Ultra'd, which interesting considering, the surrounding stuff going on here, all the other federy going on, and then now that we're getting to that later, whenever she gets busted, because her story is she was abducted. There was all sorts of recordings she put out to provide proof of life, and then I think kind of over time she was putting out more propaganda type stuff for them, and it became actually like propaganda. She seems to be she became dyed in the wool, although she was with them, I believe, something like over six. I don't remember how long it was. It was a while.
6 months,
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah, that's
give or
right.
take.
So I mean, that amount of time, of being in a situation like that where you're a kidnapper, or not kidnapper, you've been kidnapped, and apparently she was supposedly getting raped and all sorts of stuff in that time
Yep.
there. So lots of abuse. I mean, it's not that crazy that she would kind of, I don't know, disassociate and maybe kind of almost create another, alter, kind of like this Tanya individual that she becomes when she joins the SLA. And yeah, she becomes one of their foot soldiers and becomes dyed in the wool and completely
Yep.
like even in the trial, basically being like all about it, kind of, fuck these pigs type deal. So yeah, I mean, you listen to some of her
Yeah.
recordings, and it's like, oh shit, she's like, I'm trying to, off all the cops and stuff. So I mean, it's not like any ifs, ands, or buts about it. So it seems like she
Yes.
kind of got brainwashed, is what it seems like. And Jolly West and some of these other people were brought into praise her state of mind, which we're getting into. It's my understanding, though, that Jolly West actually, surprisingly, if I recall correctly, essentially kind of in the, his recommendation was that she should essentially be, I don't know, found innocent or something along, essentially providing, backing up his professional opinion, saying that yeah, she was brainwashed and fucked with, but that stuff never came to light. The jury, or however, essentially never got brought into the court. That was never brought up. So I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird that he would back that up. I
Yeah.
mean, because I'm obviously the angle here that we would take is that they're either here to cover it up. Kind of weird in this situation that maybe they didn't, although maybe there was some sort of other limited hangout in there somewhere. I don't know.
So I do think okay, first of all, I don't think that Jolly West was like a sociopath. I do believe that he had like psychopathic tendencies, but I believe because of um oh damn it, what was his name? There was a man in Texas kidnapped a little girl, committed a horrible act against her.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember what his name is. We will touch
I
on
know what
him
you're
at
talking
some
about. Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That'll come up
Um,
for sure.
so I believe that he actually felt guilty for that because of what programs he was leading at the military base that this man had been treated at. So, I do think that there were parts of Jolly West where his humanity shone through. Um, but the fact that he was able to turn that off is, something that Sidney Gottlieb said that he like really enjoyed that part of him, which is really a sick thing to say. Um, so real quick, Patty Hearst is actually the daughter of William Randolph Hearst Sr. Um, let's see.
He was some sort of big shot. I forget what exactly
Yeah,
for,
so
but
he was an American newspaper publisher and a politician who developed the nation's largest newspaper chain and media company, Hearst Communications. Um, it's Hearst Communications is kind of why we only have 6 companies that own all of media today. That kind of like set the groundwork and the model uh, for the consolidation. So thanks for that. His flamboyant methods of yellow journalism influenced the nation's popular media by emphasizing sensationalism and human interest stories. Hearst entered the publishing business in 1887 with Michael Trubet after being given control of the San Francisco Examiner by his wealthy father, Senator George Hearst. After moving to New York City, Hearst acquired the New York Journal and uh, fought a bitter war with Joseph Pulitzer, or Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. Hearst sold papers by printing giant headlines over lurid stories featuring crime, corruption, sex, innuendos. Hearst acquired more newspapers and created a chain that numbered nearly 30 papers in major American cities at its peak. He later expanded to magazines, creating the largest newspaper and magazine business in the world. Hearst controlled the editorial positions and coverage of political news in all his papers and magazines, and thereby often published his personal views. He sensationalized Spanish atrocities in Cuba while calling for war in 1898 against Spain, which famously Edward Bernays helped with that whole campaign. Historians, however, reject his subsequent claims to have started the war with Spain as overtly exaggerated. Yeah, but it was Edward Bernays who played a major role in that.
mm-hmm.
Um, let's see. So he was a Democrat. I mean, so this is the type of family that she is coming from.
Yep.
Okay. So, like, I mean, this is Mockingbird before Mockingbird,
Yep.
right? Like, this is insane. So, this guy had the intent of like influencing people very clearly. And in fact, there's a lot of people that believe that Patty Hearst was actually kind of like, hey, you should go do this.
Yeah, the from my understanding, the her doing it before there, I forget the specifics. This is an Austin's episode for those who are interested in it. But I believe she supposedly was talking to them before this even happened, and the rumor was that she was of the belief that they thought that they were going to kidnap her sisters or something, and it ended up being her. I guess DeFreeze pulled that audible. Essentially, is what it sounds like. The claim is, and that he decided to pick her instead for some reason. And so she was the one. So I mean, I know it
Yep.
does makes I mean, if we get a little schizo here, like yeah, it does kind of make sense. You know, you think the role her dad fills a lot of the times the stuff is familial. I mean, it's a little dark that you would kind of offer up your child in that way, or you'd be complicit. But I don't know, it's a possibility. And you think about the I mean, shit. Like the part of the reason, I mean, hell, what Donald DeFreeze, while he was in prison going through these MK Ultra experiments, there was I don't remember the specific source or how they found this, but he was saying at that time that they when they got out, they were planning on fucking kidnapping someone her stature. I guess they passed around the idea of like the Kennedys and settled on the one of the God, why can't I think of Hearst, one of the Hearst instead.
Yep.
And so that's where they end up going. So because it makes sense, they were looking for a big political target, and the plan was that they were going to kidnap them, and then they were going to essentially brainwash them into being one of them, and that's what they did. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting that it's kind of like that this would happen. I mean, especially now that you tie into it all the other the Fed connections and
Yep.
obviously MK Ultra, and you're like, all right, well this is a little weird. Especially as I said before, that's kind of sort of what Manson was kind of doing, and obviously didn't kidnap someone, but they were manipulating
I mean,
people in different
kind of.
ways. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
So, I mean, I just to piggyback off of what you said, I actually don't think it's that large of a leap to say that this was kind of loosely orchestrated at worst, I would say. So, just real quick, following Hitler's rise to power, Hearst became a supporter of the Nazi Party, ordering his journalists to publish favorable coverage of Nazi Germany and allowing leading Nazis to publish articles in his newspapers. He was a leading supporter of Franklin D. Roosevelt, no surprise there, in 1932 through 1934, but then broke with FDR and became his most prominent enemy on the right. Uh, like how you could just switch back and forth like that. Politics in a nutshell. Hearst's publication reached a peak circulation of 20 million readers a day in the mid 1930s. He poorly managed finances and was so deeply in debt during the Great Depression that most of his assets had to be liquidated in the late 1930s. Hearst managed to keep his newspapers and magazines. His life story was the main inspiration for Charles Foster Kane, the lead character in Orson Welles' film Citizen Kane. His Hearst Castle, blah 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 blah. Yeah, none of that matters. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is the Hearst family. You know,
yeah,
it's a temporary oligarch, I guess. You know, they get a bunch of money, but then they can't keep it, like some of the other families, like the Rothschilds, the Chase. Um, just take your pick, but
yeah. Well, all right. Let's. I mean, let's. I guess to bring it back and to kind of finish this off. I guess we're kind of bringing it. This is once again kind of come back to the Fed doctors out there that end up having associations with the with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. We've already talked, plenty about Jolly West, and we'll definitely probably talk about him in future installments more.
We'll have
But
to.
yeah, but we have Lifton and Orn. So I guess probably before we get out of here, we'll talk about them a little bit, and I guess just kind of a peek of things to come. We have Margaret Singer, which for some reason I could have swore she was somehow involved in the saga of Hearst, but maybe not. Maybe I'm recalling that incorrectly. But next episode we'll kind of get into her, and that'll tie back into Jonestown again. Because like I said, this will be meandering. We'll be going back into stuff we've gone before, but there's different connections for a different one of these people, so it allows you to see how through and through it is through multiple things, even just like Jonestown. We talked about in the first episode. I forget who the connection was there, but now we're coming back through with a singer thread through there. So,
Yep.
And who knows? Maybe we'll meander back to it with another thread from some other spook doctor. But yeah, I guess let's just kind of hone in these last two spook doctors, kind of let people know a little bit of background information of them, and maybe they'll come back up again in future installments. But we have Lifton, and then we had Orn, were the other two that we hadn't really talked on.
Yeah. So after the SLA's gun-toting crime spree, Patricia Hearst, in preparation for trial, had 3 psychiatrists called in to appraise her state of mind: Dr. Martin T. Orn, Dr. Robert J. Lifton, and Dr. Lewis Jolin West. Dr. Margaret Singer actually came in and testified on her behalf, but what ended up happening is the judge struck her testimony from the record or whatever. She actually got super pissed, filed a lawsuit against it about it. Her ego was damaged, and on the surface, what's really interesting about these people is they're all very well respected in their fields, but you just scratch the surface and they're terrible people. So the reason it is kind of important to point out where these people are intersecting: Robert J. Lifton, Martin T. Orn, Jolly West, Margaret Singer, not the Planned Parenthood lady, that's somebody different. Margaret Singer, not Sanger. Dr. Margaret Sanger, all 4 of these people were involved in the very first program right after, or I guess it started towards the tail end of the Korean War, when U.S. POWs were coming home, and had admitted to the general public that the U.S. was using biological weapons over in Korea. The story that was sold to the public was that the Chinese, the Russians, Koreans, and somebody else had brainwashed our soldiers and had gotten them to say these things. Although now, through released historical documents and other corroborating evidence, we know that we actually were using biological weapons over there. But that brainwashing of these soldiers, or these POWs, was the justification for the start of MK Ultra. There was a couple of different programs that kind of examined these people, and that's where, at least officially, at least all 4 of these doctors end up meeting. There's evidence that they had connections before them, but this is where they got to know each other, because they spent a lot of time with each other from 1952 to 1958 to 1960. They were all involved in this program. And it kind of seems like what they actually did was take healthy soldiers who couldn't face the reality of what this country was doing to innocent people, and we actually brainwashed them so they would shut up. That's what the evidence points to anyways. Just go look at what was the result of this program. But this is where they first meet. So when all of these doctors meet again in the Patty Hearst trial, it's like, this is just really odd. And yes, we will end up coming back full circle to a lot of these things, probably bounce over here and there, because they all intersect at the oddest points because nobody expected them to run into each other at the Hearst trial,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think leads or gives credence to the fact that it might have been loosely planned or kind of like a let's set these things in motion and see what happens kind of a
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it is
Um,
weird that they do come to her rescue at the end, though. But it's like,
yeah,
so you could pass it off as some
and
grand
she gets
conspiracy,
better.
or I think you providing the context of like the last time they met, essentially, or the big times they met was the outset of what this thing now has become. So
Yeah,
maybe there is a pang of guilt between them of like, oh shit, this is kind of fucked up. So I mean, and the cat was already out of the bag, so kind of what harm would it really have to go just let
yeah.
this bitch go, you know? So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have anything other last comments about any of these individuals, but I think otherwise, I think we're probably at a good spot. We can pick this back up in a few weeks or so and
Yeah.
do a third installment of this series.
Yeah, most definitely. So just to wrap up real quick, um, what's really interesting about this, there were two people that stayed in contact with each other. So um, all of these doctors, and I mean, there's more to come as well. There's a lot more. These are just the most prominent. So let's just try to keep it simple. Um, so Martin Orn and Robert J. Lifton, they kind of went off and go do their own thing. They kept in touch through letter writing and you know different things like that. But Jolly West and Margaret Singer actually were like best friends. So it's really strange because they were never that far away from each other. And that's just something to keep in mind for further installments because of where these people end up is just incredibly fascinating. Um, so, just to wrap up on that, though, I've actually already got multiple parts done already. I will be releasing part 4 tonight, right after we're done with this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've already got several different parts done, and I've got all sorts of things that go along with this that like show all sorts of other stuff like visualization maps, and it's become quite the project.
Yeah.
So yeah, make sure and just keep an eye out for that. And there is so much more to come, and it only gets crazier from here.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, guys, go check that out at Rise to Liberty. That is a good. We just covered for context. He's saying he's about to drop part 4. In this episode, we just essentially finished up what was essentially covered in part 1. So in the 2 episodes, so there's definitely more to come. Be going a lot deeper. So there'll probably be probably quite a few of these. But with that, let people know where they can find you at. I'm going to be coming on your show next week. So I think by the time this episode drops, this episode should drop on the day I'm doing your episode. So there you
Yeah.
go. If you're watching this, is one of the poors out there that's not supporting my channel, then when you see this drop, he'll also be going live on Jacob's channel. I think you do live usually, right? So there you go. I'll be live on your channel. So go check me out on there. But yeah, let people know where they can find you, that kind of stuff. Hawk your wares.
Yeah, so the best place you can go to find all of my platforms is risetoliberty.com/links. That just pulls up all of my platforms, choose your favorite, and go from there. I try to make myself available to all the platforms that people like. But I am the most active on X or Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. That's pretty much where I spend my time. And you can find me on those places. X and Telegram are both at Rise to Liberty, and then Instagram is at Rise to Liberty Pod.
Awesome. Appreciate you coming on. We'll do this again soon. This is a
Hell
No Way
yeah.
Jose show. This is on all the major podcatchers, Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, pretty much anywhere you get podcasts at. Do want to give a big shout out to my sponsors that help me do what I do. Support me over at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. I have my co-host Toad on Tower Gang, at Tower Gang Toad. That's at Abrogate D's, at ZOVERACK, at underscore Infinite Zeal. Then Jacob Daniel of the Biblical Anarchy podcast. Follow him at Biblical Anarchy. Then my homie Tim Tuttle made that dope edit at the beginning at Jolly Klebold. Then my buddy Will Bell makes this delicious rabbit eye blueberry wine. Great stuff. Go get that. He sells that shit online, so you can get that there. But yeah, appreciate everyone who showed up. Like, share, subscribe, comment, boost it up in the algos, all that good stuff. Appreciate all my people who support me doing what I'm doing, and we'll do this again soon. Thanks, Jacob.
Oh, yeah, anytime. See you soon.